Now let's look at how to solve a little bit more complex absolute value equation. First one we're going to look at, absolute value of x plus 1 is equal to 8. And so what this is asking us is if we take a number and add 1 to it, and then take the absolute value of that sum, that absolute value would equal 8. Well, that would mean that the x plus 1 would have to equal 8, correct? We would subtract 1, so x would equal 7. And so if we substituted that back in, 7 plus 1 is 8, and the absolute value of 8 is 8. But we saw in the earlier video that when we solved the absolute value of just x, we actually had two different numbers. Well, there's actually another number that we could put here for x that would, when added to 1 and taken the absolute value of, would equal 8. And that's going to be the value of x that when we do x plus 1, we equal negative 8. So if I subtract 1 here and here, I get x is equal to negative 9. Well, let's plug that back in and see why this works, because this is the one that often confuses people at first. So if we take the negative 9 and we plug that back in, we'd have the absolute value of negative 9 plus 1 is equal to 8. Well, negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8, so we have the absolute value of negative 8 equals 8. And we know the absolute value of negative 8 is in fact 8. So our two solutions here are 7 and negative 9. Let's take a look at another one. We have the absolute value of 2x minus 3 is equal to 15. Well, in this one, we want to set up our two equations like we had here. We're going to do 2x minus 3 equals 15, and 2x minus 3 is equal to negative 15. And now we need to solve each of those. So we're going to add 3 here to get 2x equals 18, divide by 2, so x can equal 9. 2 times 9 is 18, minus 3 is 15, absolute value of 15 is 15. Here we can add 3, and we get 2x equals negative 12. We divide by 2, and we get x equals negative 6. Let's check that one back in. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12, minus 3 is negative 15, and the absolute value of negative 15 is positive 15. So those would be our two answers. Let's look at another one. We have 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 2 is equal to 18. Well, this one's a little bit different because it's got something multiplied on the outside of the absolute value sign. Now, one thing I want to caution you about is that in many ways we treat absolute value signs like parentheses, but they are definitely not parentheses. So we never, 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 never want to distribute into absolute value signs. So we want to start by getting rid of this 3. Because we cannot set up our two equations like we did in these first two until what is in absolute values, this part right here, is by itself. So our first step here is going to be divide both sides by 3. We now have the absolute value of 2x minus 2 equal to 6. Now we can set up our two equations. 2x minus 2 equals 6. 2x minus 2 equals negative 6. And then we solve each of those. Here we add 2 to both sides to get 2x equals 8. Divide by 2, and we have x is equal to 4. Well, let's check that out. 2 times 4 is 8, minus 2 is 6. Absolute value of 6 is 6, times 3 equals 18. Now let's try this one over here. Again, we add 2 to both sides, so 2x equals negative 4. Divide by 2, we have x equal to negative 2. Let's plug that one back in. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, minus 2 is negative 6. The absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. Positive 6 times positive 3 is 18. So those are our two solutions. Let's look at one more that gets a little bit more complicated. We have 2 times the absolute value of 6x plus 5 minus 1 equals 25. Now again, as we said over here, our first goal is to get whatever is being, the absolute value is being taken of, we want to get that by itself first. So in this case, we need to get rid of this 2, and we need to get rid of this minus 1. Well, this 1 is being subtracted, this is being multiplied, and we know from solving equations all year that we have to get rid of, undo addition and subtraction first. So our first step is we're going to add 1 to both sides. So we now have 2 times the absolute value of 6x plus 5 is equal to 26. Now this right here looks like what we'd had to start over here, and we knew here we had to divide, so here we're going to divide both sides by 2. And we now have the absolute value of 6x plus 5 equal to 13. I just made a little mistake there that I wanted to point out. At first I made my little absolute value bar a little short, and we want to make sure that we make those nice and tall so we don't confuse them for ones. I don't want to look at this later and think that that was a 16 rather than the absolute value of a 6x. So now that I have my absolute value by itself, now I can write my two equations. I have 6x plus 5 is equal to 13, and 6x plus 5 is equal to negative 13. So now I subtract 5 here, and I have 6x equals 8, divide both sides by 6, and I have x equals 8 divided by 6. That does not divide evenly, so I'm going to leave it as a fraction in simplest form. 8 and 6 can both be divided by 2, so that's going to be 4/3. Over here I subtract 5, I have 6x is equal to negative 13 minus 5 is negative 18. Divide both sides by 6, so x equals negative 3. And those are our two solutions.